Can't you see? Are you blind? This kind of poor dressing isn't allowed here." Gregory's words slashed through the tense silence, his smirk widening as eyes turned toward Camille. A bitter laugh nearly escaped her. So this was their excuse? She gripped her blazer tighter, steadying herself. And then came the words that would change everything. "You're fired," Gregory barked, his voice slicing through the tense air of the boardroom like a blade. His tone was sharp, dismissive, and laced with condescension. Every head in the room turned toward Camille Johnson, who stood frozen at the center of the chaos. Her heart pounded so loudly she swore everyone could hear it. "Unprofessional appearance?" Camille finally managed to say, her voice trembling but defiant. She gestured to her modest yet polished blazer, her fingers gripping the fabric as if trying to shield herself from judgment. "Are you serious?" Gregory leaned back in his chair, smirking as though he had just delivered a clever punchline instead of ruining someone's livelihood. "Look around, Camille," he said, sweeping an arm toward their colleagues. "Everyone else dresses appropriately. Maybe if you—" The murmurs began then, low and uncomfortable. Some employees shifted awkwardly in their seats, avoiding eye contact altogether. Others discreetly pulled out their phones, recording the scene under the guise of checking emails. Camille felt the weight of their stares pressing down on her, suffocating her. "Maybe if you invested more in yourself," Gregory continued, letting the implication hang heavily in the air. His words weren't just about clothes, they were about class, about worth, about everything Camille had worked tirelessly to overcome. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails digging into her palms. She wanted to scream, to demand respect, but all that came out was a shaky breath. "This isn't about how I dress," she shot back, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's about control." Gregory raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Control? No, Camille. This is about professionalism." His smirk widened, and the room seemed to shrink around her. Colleagues exchanged glances, some sympathetic, others indifferent, but no one spoke up. The silence was deafening. Tears blurred Camille's vision as she turned away, unable to bear another second of Gregory's disdainful gaze. The click of her heels against the floor echoed through the hallway, each step heavier than the last. Her mind raced with questions. How could this happen? Why hadn't anyone defended her? As the sound faded into silence, memories of her journey flooded back, unbidden and raw. Growing up in a cramped apartment where the heat barely worked, Camille learned early what it meant to fight for survival. Her mother juggled 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, yet she always found time to remind Camille of her potential. "You're going places," her mom would say, even as eviction notices piled up. Camille took those words to heart, excelling in school despite outdated textbooks and overcrowded classrooms. She dreamed of breaking barriers, of creating opportunities for others who faced the same systemic hurdles she did. But that dream came with sacrifices. Long nights studying by candlelight, thrift store clothes stitched together with care, and a relentless drive to prove doubters wrong. Years later, Camille stood outside Hartwell Enterprises, diploma in hand, feeling both pride and unease. She had earned this spot after graduating top of her class from community college, a feat no one expected from someone like her. Still, as she walked through the sleek glass doors, whispers followed her. "Is she even qualified?" someone muttered during her first meeting. Another colleague asked if she could afford the networking events they casually mentioned. Camille bit back a retort, choosing instead to focus on her work. She poured her energy into crafting innovative campaigns, determined to show them she belonged. Yet every compliment felt lukewarm, every achievement dismissed as luck rather than skill. The comments about her natural hair started small but stung deeply. "It's so bold," one coworker remarked, their tone implying it wasn't a compliment. Another joked about how her blazers looked vintage, though everyone knew they meant cheap. Each remark chipped away at her confidence, making her question whether she'd ever truly fit in. Camille tried to brush it off, telling herself these were isolated incidents. But when Gregory laughed about her goodwill style behind closed doors, unaware she was listening, something inside her shifted. These weren't harmless jokes. They were calculated jabs designed to remind her of her place. As Camille sat alone at her desk, surrounded by colleagues sipping overpriced lattes and discussing weekend yacht trips, she realized the truth. This wasn't just a workplace. It was a fortress built to keep people like her out. "I didn't come this far to let them win," she whispered to herself, her resolve hardening. "Hold on, Camille," Gregory interjected, cutting her off mid-sentence during yet another team meeting. His tone was dismissive, as if her words carried no weight. She had been explaining a strategy to boost engagement among underrepresented demographics, a plan she'd spent weeks refining. But before she could finish, he turned to Jake, a white coworker sitting across the table. "What do you think, Jake?" Gregory asked, his voice suddenly warm and encouraging. Jake hesitated for a moment, then repeated almost verbatim what Camille had just said. "Exactly!" Gregory exclaimed, clapping his hands together. "That's brilliant!" Camille clenched her fists under the table, forcing herself to stay composed. It wasn't the first time this had happened, and it wouldn't be the last. After leading a campaign that exceeded expectations, Camille approached Gregory for feedback, hoping for validation. Instead, he glanced up briefly from his phone and muttered, "Good job, I guess." The lukewarm acknowledgement hit harder than silence would have. Her jaw tightened as she forced a polite smile. "Thanks," she replied, though her voice betrayed her disappointment. Inside, frustration bubbled over. How many more hurdles would she need to clear before they took her seriously? Still, she resolved to push forward, refusing to let their indifference define her worth. Later that week, Camille lingered outside Gregory's office, intending to ask about an upcoming project. Before she could knock, his voice drifted through the cracked door, sharp with mockery. "Did you see her blazer? Looks like she shops at Goodwill," he sneered, laughing alongside another executive. Her breath caught in her throat, and her body went rigid. Each word felt like a punch to the gut. She wanted to barge in, to demand respect, but instead she stood frozen, listening as their laughter echoed cruelly. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Silently, she turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last. Back in the restroom, Camille stared at her reflection, searching for answers in her own eyes. Did she belong here? The question gnawed at her, fueled by months of subtle jabs and outright disrespect. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders, but beneath it lay a flicker of defiance. "I didn't come this far to quit now," she whispered to herself, straightening her posture. Whatever it took, she vowed to prove them wrong, even if it meant fighting every step of the way. "And that's why this strategy will revolutionize our approach," Camille began, her voice steady as she unveiled the proposal she'd poured weeks into perfecting. But before she could finish, Gregory cut in with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Interesting ideas, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves," he said, leaning forward smugly. "This is just basic research I've been working on for years." His tone dripped with condescension, erasing her contributions entirely. Camille's hands trembled as she gripped the edges of the podium, her knuckles whitening. She opened her mouth to protest, but Gregory plowed on, rephrasing her exact words as if they were his own. The audience nodded along, oblivious to the theft unfolding before them. Each stolen sentence felt like another brick added to the wall between her and recognition. Gregory turned back to Camille, his smile razor-sharp. "You've done adequate work," he said, drawing out the word as if it pained him to acknowledge even that much. "But there's still so much you need to learn." The room fell silent except for the faint rustle of phones being pulled out to record the spectacle. Some colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others exchanged knowing glances. Camille fought to keep her composure, swallowing hard as tears threatened to spill. Her chest tightened, each breath feeling heavier than the last. She wanted to scream, to demand justice, but all she could do was stand there, frozen under the weight of his betrayal. Later that afternoon, Gregory summoned her to his office under the guise of discussing her performance review. "We need to talk about your future here," he began, his tone falsely sympathetic. "My future?" Camille echoed, confusion lacing her voice. "Yes," he replied, leaning back in his chair. "Unfortunately, we feel you're not quite the right fit for Hartwell Enterprises. You don't align with our culture." His words landed like a hammer blow, leaving her stunned. "What does that even mean?" she demanded, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "It means," he said coldly, "maybe this isn't the place for someone like you." The implication hung heavy in the air, cutting deeper than any insult ever had. Camille's mind raced, searching for a response, but no words came. Hours later, sitting alone on a park bench, Camille scrolled through social media, only to find clips of Gregory's earlier remarks going viral. Commenters mocked her appearance, calling her unpolished and out of place. Others defended Gregory, praising him as a strong leader. Her stomach churned as she read each comment, the online ridicule compounding the humiliation she already felt. She stared at her phone, her reflection distorted on its screen, wondering how things had spiraled so far out of control. For a moment, she considered deleting the app altogether, but something stopped her. Maybe it wasn't over yet. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Camille wiped away tears, her resolve flickering like the fading light. "How can I fight this?" she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. Yet, deep down, she knew giving up wasn't an option. Clenching her fists, she vowed to rise stronger and smarter than ever before. "Camille, it's Victoria Langston," came the voice on the other end of the line, firm yet warm. Camille froze mid-step, her heart skipping a beat. It had been years since she'd heard from her former mentor. "I've been following what happened at Hartwell," Victoria continued, cutting straight to the point. "You deserve better than how they treated you. And now there's an opportunity, a chance to take control." "What do you mean?" Camille asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. "Hartwell is drowning in debt, and their leadership has failed them," Victoria explained. "With my backing, you can buy controlling shares. You'll have the power to change everything." After hanging up, Camille sat in silence, staring at the phone as if it might hold all the answers. Could she really step into such a monumental role? The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, but so did the memory of Gregory's smug face. "You've always fought for justice," Victoria had said before ending the call. "Now here's your chance to make systemic change, not just for yourself, but for everyone who's ever been silenced." Her words echoed in Camille's mind, reigniting a spark within her. She thought about the countless others who'd faced similar injustices, their voices buried under layers of bias. Slowly, resolve replaced doubt. "I didn't come this far to back down now," she whispered to herself, gripping the phone tightly. The next morning, Camille strode into Hartwell Enterprises, not as an employee, but as its new majority shareholder. Heads turned instantly. Whispers rippled through the office like wildfire. Gregory emerged from his corner office, his confident smirk faltering when he saw her. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his tone laced with unease. "I'm taking back what was stolen," Camille replied, her voice steady and commanding. She handed him a document detailing her acquisition, watching as panic flickered across his face. Employees gathered around, some stunned, others visibly thrilled by the sudden shift in power dynamics. Gregory stammered, trying to regain composure, but Camille cut him off. "Save it for the meeting," she said coolly, leaving him speechless. During the emergency Zoom call, Camille addressed the staff with unwavering authority. "For too long, this company has operated under a culture of exclusion and discrimination," she began, locking eyes with Gregory through the screen. "But that ends today." She recounted specific instances of his misconduct, exposing his biases to the entire team. Gasps filled the virtual room as employees processed the truth. Gregory stared blankly, his usual bravado crumbling under the weight of accountability. As applause erupted from the chat, Camille felt a surge of vindication. But she knew this was only the beginning. Alone in the boardroom afterward, Camille exhaled deeply, the enormity of her actions sinking in. Challenges lay ahead, but for the first time, she felt truly unstoppable. Standing tall, she whispered, "Let's rebuild this place the right way." "You tried to silence me," Camille began, her voice cutting through the virtual room like a blade. Every employee sat frozen, their eyes glued to the screen as she addressed them with unshakable poise. "You dismissed my contributions, mocked my appearance, and treated me as if I didn't belong." She paused, letting her words sink in before turning directly to Gregory. "But today, I'm taking back what you tried to destroy. My dignity, my voice, and this company's future." With a single click, she terminated his employment live on Zoom. The sound of keys clacking echoed briefly before silence fell over the call. Gregory stared blankly, his face pale with shock, unable to process what had just happened. "For too long, people like him have held power at the expense of others," Camille continued, her tone unwavering. "That ends now." As Gregory disappeared from the screen, the room erupted into applause. Messages flooded the chat, "Thank you, Camille." And, finally, someone stood up. Some employees even unmuted themselves to cheer aloud. "I should have said something sooner," one colleague admitted during the chaos, their regret palpable. Another chimed in, "We all let this happen, not anymore." Camille listened, her chest swelling with pride. Not for herself, but for the unity forming around her. For the first time, she felt surrounded by allies rather than bystanders. "This is just the beginning," she said firmly, her voice carrying both resolve and hope. Over the following weeks, Camille transformed Hartwell Enterprises from within. She introduced mandatory diversity training programs, revamped hiring practices to prioritize equity, and created mentorship opportunities for underrepresented employees. "No one deserves to feel invisible here," she declared during an all-hands meeting. "Our success depends on embracing every voice." Employees responded enthusiastically, sharing stories of how these changes made them feel valued for the first time. Morale soared, as walls once built on exclusion began to crumble. Yet, Camille knew true progress would take time and vigilance. "Change isn't easy," she reminded everyone, "but it's worth fighting for." News of Camille's bold actions spread rapidly online, sparking conversations about systemic racism in workplaces worldwide. Interviews poured in, each headline amplifying her message, "Empowerment over oppression." "It's not just about me," Camille emphasized during one interview. "It's about creating spaces where everyone can thrive without fear of bias or discrimination." Her story resonated deeply, inspiring countless individuals to speak out against injustice in their own lives. Social media buzzed with hashtags like "Take Your Power Back" and "Equality at Work," turning her personal victory into a global movement. As Camille smiled confidently during a press conference, she reflected on how far she'd come and how much further there was to go. "The fight doesn't end here," she said softly, her words echoing beyond the room. "Together, we'll keep breaking barriers." "What did you think of Camille's journey?" she asks, her tone warm yet urgent. "Have you faced similar challenges? Share your story in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going." Her words linger, inviting viewers to reflect on their own experiences and connect with the broader fight against systemic racism. If this resonated with you, don't stop here, Camille continues, her voice filled with determination. "In cross-career to protect the public and build back better." Hit that like button, subscribe, and enable notifications so we can work together toward equality and justice. One story at a time. She pauses, her conviction unwavering. Change starts with us. Let's build a world where everyone has a seat at the table.